Let's talk Kamala Harris and truancy. Since some of y'all only gonna watch about 20 seconds of this video, let me make two things clear up front. Number one, Kamala Harris never threw any parents in jail behind truancy, period. Number two, truancy had been a prosecutable offense in the state of California since 1977. So Kamala Harris did not create truancy as a prosecutable offense where there had not already been a prosecutable offense for decades, period. For those of y'all still watching, I've had a busy week checking Molly number 1 and checking Molly number 2. Now I gotta check Molly number 3. And Molly number 3 can be more like Molly number 1 because I did a thread debunking her hit piece in Huffington Post back in March. And the reason why I call it a hit piece is because, number one, it's inflammatory. The headline alone is clickbait. It says, the human cost of Kamala Harris's war on truancy. Oh, that sounds so inflammatory, doesn't it? Oh my God. Kamala Harris is a monster. Not. Number 2, what she does is she presents facts as a question mark. And then she turns around and she spins things. She has her interpretation and she presents those as facts. Now, how does that work? The number one reason why you can throw out her interpretation of the facts is because she makes the poster woman of this so-called human cost of Kamala Harris's, not anybody else's, Kamala Harris's specifically, war on truancy, is Miss Cherie Peoples. Now, what happened to Miss Cherie Peoples is terrible. It must have been incredibly difficult to go through what she went through. However, with that being said, it had absolutely nothing to do with Kamala Harris. Nothing. And if you read the contemporaneous reporting, which is linked to in the hit piece, which she's Molly number 3 / Molly number 1 is banking on you not looking at, it's very clear that Kamala Harris had nothing to do with that. In fact, the article that's linked to in this hit piece does not mention Kamala Harris by name. It does not mention the law that Kamala Harris was even involved in. So, to present a person that had absolutely nothing, had no impact from Kamala Harris as a poster woman is intellectually dishonest, and that's why I call it a hit piece. So I just want to discuss a few things, and sorry I have to look at my notes here. I just want to discuss a few passages that I feel like are particularly problematic because, as I said, things are presented in a way to try to be an indictment on Kamala Harris, even though Kamala Harris had nothing to do with it. So in one of the passages, it says, Orange County heeded her call with particular enthusiasm, her being Kamala Harris. I'm going to show you how that's inaccurate. It talks about how Peoples was arrested, and then the author writes, as part of what one district attorney painted as an effort to prevent children from being criminals or joining a gang. Now, Ms. Cherie Peoples, obviously her child was not involved in any kind of gang activity or anything like that. However, it is true that the program that spurred this type of action was a gang reduction program. It was called the GRIP program. It was a program in Orange County that had been in place for several years before the so-called Kamala Harris truancy bill. Now, mind you, this arrest happened 2 years after the truancy bill was put into place. So the horror story took a whole 2 years before anybody even was quote unquote caught up in the law, number one. And number two, when you actually look at the details of the case, it had nothing to do with there being a truancy law. And the reason why I can say that without a shadow of a doubt is because within the article itself, it actually talks about a little bit of the background behind it. It says that in the 5 years, now mind you, this is a 2013 article. In the 5 years, the program has been active in OC. Only 11 parents have been arrested. Okay, so that's 5 years, 11 parents arrested. But I thought that Kamala Harris's truancy law was the reason why people were getting arrested. But 11 people have been arrested in 5 years. Now let's rewind from 5 years in 2013 is 2008. So they had already been arresting people. They had already been arresting people because they were already empowered to do so under the law in California since 1977. That's why. So it had nothing to do with Kamala Harris. Now again, I'm not saying that what happened to Cherie Peoples was cool. I'm not saying it's acceptable. But what I am saying is that to characterize anything that happened to her as a result or a byproduct of Kamala Harris is intellectually dishonest, and it's ahistorical, and it's not factual. Period. Okay, contemporaneous reporting confirms that. And I'm not here to defend the GRIP program, even though it is worth noting that there are success stories within this GRIP program. And in that particular article that's referenced, and the article is Keeping Kids Out of Gangs and in School. That's a 2013 article. I am a big fan of contemporaneous reporting because, you know, it's funny how different stuff is framed when there isn't a presidential campaign. It's funny how different, you know, things are put out there. Kamala Harris' name is not in this article. So all of a sudden now Kamala Harris is the big bad wolf in this? I don't think so. But in the article, it talks about how there were 10,000 people that were involved in this program. That includes law enforcement, that includes school administration officials, that includes parents, that includes kids. And it was tough for people. Some people benefited from the program. In this article, like I said, it talks about a woman who, you know, her son was doing terribly, and as a result of the program, she got parenting classes, her son got help, and things turned around. So I do think that there's a lack of nuance that is presented in these cases. And the problem that I have with a lot of things that are presented about Kamala Harris is, number one, they cherry pick things and they try to come up with these horror stories. And they try to assign blame to Kamala when Kamala wasn't even personally involved with it. So how does that make sense? Now, imagine if Kamala Harris ran a campaign where she talked about every single horror story. What if she talked about every child that was molested and she put their child molesters behind bars? What if she talked about every mother who suffered, whose child was a homicide victim and how she put those murderers behind bars? I don't think we want to have a campaign on nothing but horror stories, right? So let's stop doing this inflammatory stuff and trying to pin stuff on Kamala that she has absolutely nothing to do with. Now, there's one other thing I want to point out about Sheree Peoples' case that I think is important to highlight in terms of how Molly number 3/1 provides the benefit of the doubt to people that were actually involved while making very harsh declarative statements that are actually not true about Kamala Harris. So let's talk about the actual DA that was involved and empowered to prosecute Sheree Peoples. It was Tony Rackauckus, who served, and I'm quoting now from the article, who served as district attorney at the time of Peoples' arrest and left office this January, also declined to answer questions, but he said he was extremely proud of his office's anti-gang efforts, including truancy enforcement. Almost all of the truancy prosecutions under Rackauckus occurred in the 18 months leading up to one of his re-election campaigns. It's not clear if this is a coincidence. It's not clear if this was a coincidence. So let me get this straight, Molly number 3/Molly number 1. It's unclear if the DA who actually charged Sheree Peoples had a political agenda, which he was empowered to carry out, by the way, since 1977, regardless of Kamala's law. It's unclear if he had an agenda or if it was a coincidence, but it's totally perfectly abundantly clear that Kamala Harris is culpable for Sheree Peoples, even though she had nothing to do with the case. That sounds like a double standard, Molly. It sounds like you got some bias issues that you need to work through because you got totally different standards for the white man DA that you have for Kamala Harris. I'm trying to figure out how Kamala is definitely responsible. And Kamala Harris definitely has a negative agenda, a malicious agenda, a crusade, a war, and a human toll. But the actual person who was sitting up there arresting this woman and other people who have been arrested them for years, it's not clear what his agenda was. How does that make sense now? It's also worth noting that in San Francisco, where Kamala Harris had been DA, they never arrested anybody, as of the time of this article, for truancy. So Kamala Harris, as I said, never sent anybody to jail for truancy, period. Another point I want to make is that the article does concede. And the article is not entirely bad. It does actually have some good insights into Kamala Harris's record. I find them to be good insights. But the problem is when you present her record as already a crusade and a war and it has a toll, human toll, then you've already set an expectation that people are going to be less receptive to the things that were positive. So I take issue with that. But anyway, it does concede that several counties that were already punitive, because again, they had been empowered since 1977 to prosecute truancy, just continued to take the punitive measures. And so it gives an example of Tulare County, and it talks about a brochure. It said the county lauded its attendance supervisors having successfully submitted 3 truancy cases the district attorney charge under Harris's new law, on top of the 500 cases being charged under California's old law. So let me get this straight. A crusade results in 3 cases. Before this crusade, there were 500 cases. 500 cases under the old law, 3 cases under the new law. That sounds like a failed crusade to me. That sounds like the crusade is over, child. That sounds like the war is over. Because I don't know how you consider 500 to 3 to be some sort of massive crusade. And mind you, this was a 2016 brochure. The law went into effect 2011. So in 5 years, there had been 3 cases, 3 total cases under the new law, Harris's law. But before that, there had been 500 cases. Do the math. Listen, all I'm saying is let's have a conversation based on facts. Don't tell me that she had a war and she had a crusade and she had a human toll when we're talking about 3 versus 500. 3 in 5 years versus 500. I would say the war is over, child. The war is damn over. So let me just close out by reiterating. Kamala Harris did not send anybody to jail over truancy. Number 1. Truancy had been against the law since 1977. Even if you take this piece that is meant to paint Kamala Harris as zealot, as cruel, who had a human toll, even though the person that they use as a human toll had nothing to do with Kamala Harris. But even if you take all that, just look at the numbers. The numbers don't support the premise. Just in one county, 500 people charged on the old law. 3 people in 5 years charged under the new law. And let's be clear. Kamala Harris, she created the Bureau of Children's Justice, and she created even more legislation that Jerry Brown vetoed that would have created more accountability and would have created more resources for schools to help students and parents of truant students. So Kamala Harris, her record on truancy is really one where she took something that was already against the law and she tried to create processes and resources behind that and a bigger emphasis on getting kids in school. We're talking about elementary to 8th grade, people. Y'all really think that those kids should not be in school? Don't you think if parents are having problems, because the critics suggest that every single student that has a parent that's not in school is because of some sort of lack of resources or whatever. And that's what the program was meant to do. That's what the law was meant to do, was meant to put in place a process that got people the help they need. And so just stop saying that Kamala Harris was out there locking up Black and brown people, that she had a war in the community. She did not. The fact of the matter is, Kamala Harris tried to stop elementary school students from being the future homicide victims as high school dropouts, period.